It began with a whisper so soft it almost disappeared in the cold air of a December morning. "Please don't fire Mommy." Those 5 words, spoken by a little girl clutching a worn teddy bear, would soon become the heart of a story that traveled across the nation, a story not of power or money, but of grace, humanity, and the unexplainable warmth that only Christmas can bring. Before that moment, Emma Clark was just another face among thousands, an exhausted single mother trying to survive in a world that rarely noticed people like her. Emma worked the night shift at Harrison Industries, one of the largest and most demanding financial firms in the city. To most executives there, she was invisible, the quiet woman who mopped the marble floors after the offices emptied, who carried cleaning supplies through glass corridors while others drove home to warm dinners and glowing fireplaces. For Emma, life was an endless race between bills, long hours, and the little moments she managed to share with her 6-year-old daughter, Lily. Every morning when her shift ended, she would pick Lily up from a neighbor's small apartment, her hands still smelling faintly of bleach, her heart heavy but proud. The winter that year was cruel. The cold seeped through old windows, and the weight of life pressed harder than ever. The rent was behind again, and the small heater in their apartment barely worked. Emma had been skipping her own meals so Lily could have enough to eat. She kept a brave face, pretending everything was fine, but the worry lines around her eyes deepened each night. She had no family left, no one to lean on, only her child and her faith that tomorrow might somehow be better. When Harrison Industries announced its budget cuts in early December, panic rippled through the lower staff. Cleaning crews and assistants whispered among themselves, fearing the worst. Emma tried to stay hopeful, telling herself she was too hardworking, too reliable to lose her job. But when she saw her name on the termination list taped to the manager's door, her chest tightened. It felt as though the world had gone silent around her. After 5 years of service, 5 years of late nights and missed holidays, she was being replaced by a cheaper cleaning service. She didn't cry right away. Instead, she folded the paper quietly, slipped it into her pocket, and went back to mopping the floor as if nothing had happened. Only later, when the halls were empty and the city lights flickered through the tall glass windows, did she allow herself to break down. She hid inside the supply closet, pressing a rag against her mouth to muffle her sobs. She thought of Lily and the small Christmas wish her daughter had whispered weeks ago, a red scarf for her doll, and maybe, if Santa had extra, a real Christmas tree this year. Emma had promised she'd make it happen somehow. Now she wasn't sure how she would even pay for food. 2 days before Christmas, Emma faced another impossible choice. The babysitter she relied on had fallen sick, and she couldn't afford to skip her last shift. So she brought Lily to work with her, promising to keep her close and quiet. "Just sit here, sweetheart," she whispered, placing Lily on a chair in the break room with a coloring book and her old teddy bear. "Mommy will finish cleaning soon, then we'll go home." That morning, the air in the building carried a strange tension. The CEO himself, Daniel Harrison, was visiting unannounced. Everyone in the company knew his reputation: brilliant, demanding, and utterly unyielding. He had built the company from the ground up after inheriting almost nothing, but in doing so, he had become a man of stone. His decisions were final, his tone cold, and his presence alone made entire departments go silent. Employees said Daniel didn't believe in Christmas parties or sentiment. He believed in numbers, discipline, and efficiency. When Daniel stepped out of the elevator that day, he didn't expect to see a little girl sitting alone in the hallway. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, and her shoes were worn from too many winters. She smiled shyly when he approached, her small fingers gripping the teddy bear tightly. "Are you lost?" he asked, his voice even but curious. Lily shook her head. "I'm waiting for Mommy. She's cleaning your office." He frowned slightly, unfamiliar with the idea that someone's child was in his building. As he walked toward his office, he saw Emma kneeling on the marble floor, scrubbing a stubborn stain near the entrance. Her hands were raw and trembling, her movements fast and anxious. He noticed the crumpled paper peeking from her pocket but didn't think much of it. Without looking up, she said softly, "I'm almost done, sir." Daniel's voice was calm but sharp. "You're not supposed to bring children here. It's against company policy." Her shoulders stiffened. She turned slowly, her face pale. The realization of who was standing before her struck like lightning. the CEO himself. Words caught in her throat as she tried to explain. "I'm so sorry, sir. My babysitter cancelled, and I didn't want to miss work. Please, she won't disturb anyone. I'll finish quickly." But Daniel wasn't listening to her words. His mind was already cataloging facts, filing them away like another administrative problem. He had seen too many excuses over the years, too many people bending rules. He was about to remind her of company regulations when Lily appeared beside her mother, small and wide-eyed. Sensing the tension in the air, Daniel looked down at the child, and something in him shifted, though he didn't understand why. Maybe it was the way she stood close to her mother, her hand clutching Emma's apron tightly, or maybe it was her soft, trembling voice that cut through the silence. "Please don't fire Mommy," she said, her words fragile but full of courage. "She's really good. She works all the time. I told Santa we just want her to be happy for Christmas." For a moment, time seemed to stop. The bustling world of corporate order faded, and in its place was something simple and pure. Daniel didn't move. His chest felt heavy, his throat tightening as if those small words had found their way into a locked part of him. He saw not just a child, but a mirror of the daughter he had once held in his arms. Before illness, before loss, before success had built walls around his heart. Emma tried to pull Lily back, mortified, whispering, "Sweetheart, hush, it's okay." But the damage, or perhaps the miracle, was already done. The CEO, who never hesitated to make hard decisions, was standing completely still, his expression unreadable. He finally spoke, his tone softer than anyone had ever heard. "What's your name?" "Lily," the little girl replied, her eyes bright despite the tension. Daniel nodded slowly, looking from her to Emma. "And your mother works very hard, doesn't she?" Lily nodded eagerly. "She's the best mommy. Even when she's tired, she still smiles." Something deep within him broke open, something he had buried for years beneath board meetings and profit margins. As Emma stood frozen, waiting for the verdict that could decide her future, Daniel realized this wasn't just another employee. This was a woman doing everything she could for her child, just as he once wished he could have done for his own. The silence lingered like snow in the air. The whisper of a child had done what no corporate presentation ever could. It had reached the heart of a man who thought he no longer had one. And from that moment on, nothing about that day, or that Christmas, would ever be the same again. The events that followed that quiet, emotional morning spread through Harrison Industries faster than any corporate memo ever could. What began as a routine day for most employees turned into a story that would become legend in the company's history, a turning point for both the people involved and the man who had built an empire on discipline and distance. Daniel Harrison, a name once synonymous with authority and calculation, had been shaken to his core by the words of a 6-year-old child. In the silence after Lily's whisper, something long buried within him had awakened. Daniel spent the next few hours in his office, trying to concentrate on his daily reports, but the sound of that little voice refused to fade. He read through figures and quarterly updates, yet every sentence blurred into the same thought: "Please don't fire Mommy." Those words echoed against the walls of his mind, breaking through the cold structure of logic that had guided him for years. It had been so long since he'd felt anything resembling compassion, and it frightened him to realize how deeply he had forgotten what kindness even felt like. Years ago, Daniel had been a different man. Before his name became attached to billion-dollar contracts and industry awards, he had been a husband and a father. He once loved Christmas, the lights, the laughter, the feeling of coming home to something warm and real. But all of that had ended when his young daughter, Emily, fell ill. The illness was sudden, cruel, and unstoppable. In a few short months, the house that once echoed with her giggles became a place of silence. His wife couldn't bear the grief, and eventually, the marriage fell apart. Daniel had thrown himself into work, building walls out of ambition and success. He told himself that emotions were weaknesses, that compassion clouded judgment, and that business left no room for heartbreak. For years, he had believed it. Until now, that afternoon, Daniel called for Emma to come to his office. The request sent a ripple of confusion through the staff. No one at her level ever received a direct summon from the CEO. Emma, still trembling from their earlier encounter, walked through the long hallway with her head down, clutching Lily's small hand. Every step felt like a march toward her own dismissal. When she finally entered, Daniel gestured for her to sit, though she hesitated to do so. It was rare, almost unthinkable, for an executive to invite a janitor to sit across from him. Daniel didn't speak at first. He simply looked at the woman before him, the exhaustion in her face, the quiet dignity in her posture, the way her daughter looked at her with absolute trust. He saw not just an employee but a person who had been fighting battles no one else noticed. For a man who had spent years buried in financial statements and efficiency graphs, the sight of simple human resilience was disarming. He reached for a folder on his desk, flipping through her employment records. 5 years of consistent work. No absences. Commendations from multiple supervisors for reliability and dedication. It struck him that in all those years, he had never once known her name. He had never noticed the person whose work ensured his office shone every morning. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a softness that surprised even himself. "You've been here a long time, Emma," he said. She nodded cautiously, her fingers tightening around her daughter's. "Yes, sir. I've tried to do my best." Daniel exhaled deeply. The form in front of him, the termination notice, suddenly felt heavier than any corporate decision he had ever made. He had signed hundreds of such forms before without hesitation, but this one made his chest ache. "I saw your name on the layoff list," he said quietly. Emma's eyes filled with panic. She opened her mouth to plead, but he raised a hand gently. "I saw it, and I removed it." Her breath caught. For a moment, she didn't understand what he meant. "You're not being let go," he continued. "In fact, I'd like to discuss a new position with you." It took her several seconds to find her voice. "A new position?" "Yes. We're restructuring our internal maintenance and operations department. I need someone trustworthy, someone who understands how things work here from the ground up. I think you'd be a perfect fit to oversee that." Emma's lips trembled as tears threatened to fall. She was too stunned to respond. It wasn't just that she had been spared, it was that someone at the top had finally seen her. Lily, still unaware of the magnitude of what had just happened, smiled brightly and said, "See, Mommy? I told you Santa listens." For the first time in years, Daniel laughed, a quiet, genuine laugh that softened the coldness around him. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small candy cane from a box of Christmas gifts his assistant had left. He handed it to Lily. "You were right," he said gently. "Sometimes Santa listens in strange ways." News of the meeting spread quickly through the company. By afternoon, whispers filled the building. Employees who had spent years working under Daniel's strict and distant leadership could hardly believe what they were hearing. The CEO, who was known for precision and control, had just reversed a firing because of a child's plea. For the first time in a long time, the building felt alive. Staff who once avoided the CEO's floor lingered near the elevators, smiling as they passed one another. The story became a spark of warmth in a place that had long forgotten it, but for Daniel, the moment was deeply personal. He sat in his office long after Emma and Lily had gone, staring out the window at the city covered in snow. He thought of his daughter, of the nights he used to sit beside her bed reading stories about kindness and magic. He thought of how he had locked all those memories away to survive the pain. And then he realized, he hadn't survived it at all. He had simply buried it. He understood now that Emma's strength, her quiet perseverance, and her love for her child mirrored everything he had once admired in his own family. It wasn't pity that moved him, it was recognition. The courage it took to keep going when life gave nothing in return was something he respected deeply. For the first time, he questioned his own philosophy. Had his success been built at too high a cost? That night, as he reviewed company policy documents, Daniel began drafting something new. It wasn't a corporate plan or a profit report, it was a proposal for a program to support employees like Emma, those who worked tirelessly behind the scenes and were often forgotten. He decided there would be new benefits for single parents, assistance funds for families in crisis, and scholarships for employees' children. He didn't announce it right away, but in that quiet office, surrounded by the glow of city lights and falling snow, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. Something inside him had begun to thaw. Meanwhile, Emma returned home with tears of relief. She didn't tell anyone about the details, only that she still had her job and that, somehow, everything was going to be okay. When Lily asked if Santa had really heard her wish, Emma smiled softly and said, "Maybe not Santa, sweetheart. Maybe someone who needed to remember what Christmas really means." In the following days, Daniel's demeanor around the office began to change. He greeted employees he once walked past. He attended the staff holiday event for the first time in a decade. And every time he saw Emma walking through the halls, he felt that quiet reminder of what a small act of compassion could do. The story reached the media before the year's end. A local journalist, hearing it from one of the employees, published an article titled, "The Whisper That Melted a CEO's Heart." It became a symbol of the season, a reminder that no matter how powerful, busy, or detached we become, a single act of humanity can rewrite everything. Daniel kept that headline on his desk for years to come, folded neatly beside a photograph of his late daughter. He never spoke much about it, but every Christmas after that, he made sure the company's tree was the biggest in the city. And each time the lights flickered on, he remembered the small voice that had reignited the part of him he thought was gone forever.